All right, just giving it a moment for everyone to join. All right, well, hello and welcome. I apologize for the delayed start. We had a little bit of a tech issue at the beginning. So I want to welcome everyone. Today's event is an open preview of the annual Aspen Ethical Leadership Program, which will take place in person in Aspen, Colorado, September 10th through 13th. The intent of these conversations that we're doing today is to demonstrate the informal opportunities that we create at the program to meet and chat with the speakers, learning more about them as people, in addition to what they have to teach us as esteemed health system leaders. This year's program theme is Leading Towards Justice. Each program day explores a different aspect of how justice can inform healthcare decision-making around both existing and emerging ethical challenges, including those raised by the promises and risks of artificial intelligence in healthcare. I'd like to extend a warm welcome today to our program alumni and accepted applicants. I saw a lot of you on the list, so thank you for joining. And I also encourage those of you who are hearing about the Aspen program for the first time to check out the website and fill out the short application form to join the program. There's no cost to apply and no obligation to attend when accepted. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. Today's conversation will be moderated by Dr. Ira Bedzow. Ira Bedzow is the Executive Director of the Emory Purpose Project and Associate Professor in the Department of Medicine and a core faculty member of Emory's Center for Ethics. He will be speaking with Dr. Charisse Madlock-Brown, the keynote for the third day of our Aspen program, which will focus on justice and bias in healthcare AI. Dr. Madlock-Brown is an associate professor in health informatics and information management at the University of Tennessee and Tennessee Health Science Center. Her areas of expertise include data management, data mining, and visualization. She leads the UTHSC Research Pipelines Lab, which provides faculty and students with an online interface for distributed computing and storage. Her research primarily focuses on data-driven analysis of electronic health records, with a particular emphasis on social determinants of health, health disparities, and multimorbidity. She's actively involved in multiple leadership roles, and those are evolving as I understand. So I will let her and Ira talk more about that if they wish. So just a little housekeeping item for today's questions, we'll use the chat. So if you have any questions, we'll open it up to audience Q&A at the end. Please use that chat function to submit your questions, and please keep audio and video muted throughout the presentation. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ira.
Thank you, Malia. First, I know that this was advertised as a conversation between Charisse and Matt. So I hope you all still decide to stay on, even if I'll be in conversation with Charisse. I know I can never replace Matt, but hopefully the conversation will still nevertheless be good. But that will be up to Charisse as much as it will be up to me. So if it's not good, we'll blame Charisse and not me. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. As you know, Charisse, this is really a low-key conversation, just as a chance to get to know you. Know your interests, know where you come from, know why you do what you do, and why you do it so well. So if you don't mind, just first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where do you always see yourself as a professor of health informatics? Was that, when you were 5, you're like, that's what I want to do when I grow up? Or just, tell us about yourself a little bit.
Okay, great. Yes. I actually grew up in Iowa City, Iowa. My family's been living in Iowa actually for generations. And as a kid, actually, when I was 5, my dream was actually to become a nun. So nothing like health informatics. Bounced around different ideas. When I was in high school, we moved to New Haven, Connecticut, and I went to like an art school, and I played the violin, and I was in the chamber orchestra, and I also was really into writing. I did a lot of like humorous personal essays. I ended up going to college early after my junior year. I went to a place called Simon's Rock College of Bard. So it's a college specifically for people who are in high school but are kind of ready to go to college early. Small little liberal arts school in Western Massachusetts in a beautiful White Pines forest. And so that was a really wonderful experience. And I would say that's it's a very small school. It's about like 350 people, have a very good faculty to student ratio. And it's a school that really tries to promote students to be sort of intellectually confident in themselves. So you get to, kind of put your own program together a little bit. We all do a thesis. Everything's very discussion, student driven, so that you're really, pushing yourself to have ideas. And so when I was at school, I was a bit of a hippie. I never grew up actually with computers. Even some of my friends still laugh because I didn't have a computer. I had a little word processor, and it was really cute. It looked like a purse. It was green, had a little handle that I could walk around in, because back then I just thought, computers were something I used to write my papers for my humanities classes, because that's kind of where I was, and worked in the library there. So, after school, I kind of bounced around, did a couple of different things, but I'd worked in the library as a student, and I'd always wanted to be a rare books librarian, because I lived in New Haven, Connecticut, and the Beinecke is this just amazing rare books library that I always just was, you don't easily get in there, but I was always fascinated by it. So anyway, I ended up going to library school, but when I did, I worked at the medical library. And it was really interesting because I found that people in medicine had a lot of interesting questions, and a lot of the tools and technology really wasn't up to speed to answer them. So I got just kind of really interested in the problems. And then in library school, I was exposed to like databases, and I was just good at it. And I just saw a lot of opportunity to do some just kind of interesting problem solving, because I'm a puzzler. And so to me, it was like, okay, here are a lot of puzzles. So I worked for the Clinical and Translational Science Institute here at Iowa. And I got convinced to get a PhD, and the rest is, just a trajectory, then it starts to veer more obviously towards where I am now at that point.
No, I am so excited right now. I was not expecting that type of intro into your life, and there's so much I want to talk to you about. Let me start on this. So it's funny. So when I think of health informatics, I think of it, and I could be very wrong. So I'm looking forward to you correcting me. I think of it as somewhat dry. But I'm also hearing that there's like your interests seem so varied and so creativity oriented. Tell me about the relationship between your interest in art and music and writing and creativity, and how it relates to the work that you do in health informatics.
Okay, yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, to me, all creativity is really about just building something kind of new and interesting. And I've always loved science. I've always been interested and loved science kind of for that reason, right? So it's like, yes, it's more, there are more rules, there's more logic involved. It's, it's not the same method of kind of expressing and building and things. But when you but what I like is just building stuff. It's like, so to me, it's like, I look at it all as, you can build stuff in the realm of writing, you can create and, build, music and something else. But to me, when I look at health informatics, I also look at it as an opportunity to, kind of when you do make these discoveries or you come up with a good research project, it's like, to me, it's like I build a hypothesis, and then finding out that it was correct, or that, you can really construct something worthwhile. To me, all of those things you can find something exciting about it. And I think also another thing too is the novelty, right? And like a lot of what people like about the creative side is that there's a lot of novelty, but to me, in the world of STEM, there's so many new things. And I'm also just the type, whereas as long as it's a puzzle, like I will puzzle all day. So, and I feel like, you can find puzzles. So for me, I like to go out and figure out where are there sort of opportunities to sort of come up with new ideas and new things. And yeah, I just try to make it exciting too. So
Well, sure. No, this is good. Like, so one of the things I'm thinking about is there's puzzles everywhere. And you can problem solve in many different types of industries. But you specifically wanted to go into health, and look at the problems there, or was health something that you fell into or became of an interest afterwards? What drew you to health informatics as opposed to problem solving in other areas that you could have found of interest?
That's really interesting. I would say a big part of it for me was like, if you take like machine learning or something, right? This is something that's been heavily used in other industries. And so to me, with kind of what I was interested in with health, I mean, one, we all have like health related problems and know people. So there's kind of that immediate, like, you just can, there's like there's a potential for really positive impact. And I think with healthcare, as Americans, we all know there are problems. So to me, it's something really meaningful to get into. It's something where I think, if you can make an impact, and I think health informatics has the potential to really just impact, everyone's health. So there was kind of that angle, but also I saw kind of opportunity, because it was so, especially when I started, this was before everybody had like a data warehouse, and it was before kind of everyone in healthcare was kind of interested in informatics, because back in the day it used to be, oh, like, are you doing genetics research? No. Well, then why do we need informatics? So I think it was more just that I thought, okay, there's all this great technology out there, and there's a whole sector that's not really leveraging it. And so to me, that kind of is what got me, one of the main things that got me interested, because I thought there's so much that people could be doing in this space.
That's great. I want to take a step back a little bit and pick up on something that you said in your intro in terms of going to college early. What was it like to go to college early? I mean, and how early was it? I mean,
so okay, so
were you
at
like 14,
Simon's Rock,
15? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So at Simon's Rock, most students go 2 years early. So I was actually old. I went only 1 year early. So I was one of the few people senior year that could legally buy alcohol. So so it was that.
Oh, so you're popular.
Yeah, exactly. The youngest person there was Mia Farrow, and Woody Allen's son, Seamus Farrow, was there when he was 11. So everybody resents him because we're all like, oh, we went early, we're in high school. And then there's like this 11-year-old.
Right.
I'm just kidding. But yeah, so most people go there after their sophomore year. I went after my junior year. I was in a position where I needed like just one more English credit to graduate. And I was just really excited. Actually, I had for several years been planning to go to a small liberal arts school. When we moved out to New Haven, I just really loved New England. Has a lot of charm. And so, yeah, I was just like really excited to get to go to a school like that. I still at that point wanted to do writing, but then when I got into college, I got more interested in like political science, anthropology, sociology. Those kind of things were just really fascinating. So that's how I ended up in like studying cross-cultural relations.
Yeah, so I saw that you studied cross-cultural relations. Tell me about that undergrad experience. I mean, what aspects did you find that drew to you, not simply just in terms of the ability to be interdisciplinary, but were there any topics or any specific cultures or entrees into culture that you were more interested or more excited about?
Okay, that's a really good question. I think one of the areas I was the most excited about was just anthropology and just studying, humans studying ourselves, right? Because we have so much history we don't really fully understand. And to me, it's always about thinking about how the past kind of informs the present. And, just being, Black in America, of course, you're going to have, I have interest just personally in intercultural relationships. because this is something, that's very hard. I mean, groups have a hard time getting along together. And so just thinking about why that is, trying to understand why do we have so much trouble kind of interacting, and also thinking about how do we shape our perceptions of other people. So my undergrad thesis was about minstrel shows. So for those of you who don't know, minstrel shows are they were these kind of really early performances that would where you'd see a lot of people dressed up in blackface, and that wasn't the only thing that they did, but that was a huge part of it. And these were kind of some of the first mass-produced forms of entertainment in our country. And so they really set the stage for kind of our whole entertainment and a lot of like our cultural ideas. So I was really interested in how kind of once you start having these mass entertainments, how does that really have these kind of long-term effects on culture and just the way we see each other, and how much it shapes our sort of cultural zeitgeist. So that was, that's kind of what got me interested.
So this is a question that I'm putting in because it's part of my axe to grind, but I want you to grind the axe for me a little bit. So, there's a lot of discussion today, both in terms of trying to convince students of the value, as well as convince everybody else of the value of a liberal arts education, or recognizing the value of humanistic inquiry. How would you say that your undergrad experience in cross-cultural studies benefited the way, not simply what you do, but how you live your life?
Oh, that's a really great question. Liberal arts education is something that's really, in my opinion, just invaluable. I wouldn't, even though when I first graduated, I was one of those people like, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself, but, you find a way and you realize that it has so much implication. I think one of the top things the liberal arts education can do is really give you that sort of intellectual self-confidence. Like, I'd never seen PowerPoint until I went to grad school and college. I never had that. We had really in-depth conversations. You were expected to come to class understanding the basics of material and ready to push your using the material to push your thinking. And so that's something I use all the time. I think that has been so important. And I think it's, they say it's something like 40% of the people who go to pursue PhDs come from liberal arts schools. And to me, that's not surprising, because it's the kind of training you need when your job is not just to, understand the content that you've been given, but to really think about how can this apply? How can we, how can we kind of build more knowledge and understanding, with what we've got? And then I think too, just the interdisciplinarity of it, I think that made a difference, because one of the hard things with health informatics is it's not, it takes a little bit from computer science and from business and from healthcare and from other fields. And a lot of people aren't used to being in a space where you're dealing with different people. So like as a grad student, I remember talking to somebody where they're like, oh, I had this research idea and I went and I talked to this physician, and it wasn't clinical research, but it was, it was more health informatics. And they said, oh, who would publish that? And I'm like, well, go and ask somebody else. Go find who would be the best person, like advocate for yourself. Don't just give up because the first person tells you, but, that it's not going to work. Because as somebody who's had an interdisciplinary education, I look at it like everybody knows their piece, right? And there's nobody that really can see, everything. So I don't get like discouraged just because I'm like, oh, this one group, they may not get it. It might give me pause. It might make me rethink my ideas, but I also have just like that understanding that everybody knows their little piece, and there's no field that's kind of like sufficient on its own. So that to me, it's like, I'm really into team science. I think partially because of that liberal arts education, where it's like you have to study a lot of different fields and figure out how to get them to work together. And I think also just studying intercultural relationships and groups kind of I'm very aware that if I hang out with the biostatisticians, they kind of, everybody has their own culture. Culture is everywhere. It isn't just this, it isn't like just, oh, races or ethnicities have culture. Like there's always like little subcultures and kind of their rules and their way of doing things. So it also helps me approach those situations without getting caught up in my own way of doing things, just kind of having more of an understanding of how to integrate and interact with people.
Was this insight just developed through your own experience, or was there a professor or a course or a mentor that introduced you to this idea, or the value of recognizing the need for being not necessarily a generalist, but being interdisciplinary and seeking out information and people and resources that aren't necessarily in your subgroup or in your specialty?
That's a good question. I would say at my particular liberal arts education, that was just the way we all were encouraged to think. We were all we all had a lot of different classes from different fields, but when we did our thesis, the idea was that we really wanted to be very interdisciplinary. So that was kind of just what was, I would say, pushed just from the college I went to. That's how we were encouraged to think.
I want to move to a little bit like what you're doing now. And I know it'll be informed by everything that we spoke about, but I need to have the self-control of moving on as opposed to just digging into what we've been speaking about, because I know that I could speak about that forever. So what are some of the things that you're working on now, or what are some of the things that you see coming down the pike in health informatics that you're really excited about?
Okay, so what am I doing right now? And then what do I think is coming down?
Right. Or meaning like you can either answer one or the other question, or if what you're working on now is also anticipating what's coming down the pike and it's really exciting, then you can answer the question in one shot.
Okay. So I guess one thing that could answer both is that, so during COVID, I was the co-lead for the National COVID Cohort Collaborative Social Determinants of Health Domain Team, which
Wait,
is
can you say that again real fast?
So the National COVID Cohort Collaborative, and what that is basically, all these different academic centers and hospitals and organizations are starting to build out their own data warehouses of patient data. And then researchers do analysis, but often it's very local. So I've been at Tennessee for a while, and, I can do analysis on Memphis data, but Memphis has its own quirks and particularities. So it may not translate into another area. And there's all sort of logistical challenges with integrating those systems, but N3C is a platform that, if you're using one of the 4 top major common data models to store your data warehouse, you can integrate it into the system. So we have over a repository of patient level EHR data for over 70 million patients across the entire country. So the kind of analysis we can do is very unique. And we can also do analysis of analysis, which I think is really interesting too, because to me, it's like, we come out with these studies and one place says findings say this, but how much is it dependent on their patient population? So we can not only have like a huge amount of data, but we can also look at what's driving some of the trends. So I've been most recently looking at how selection criteria in long COVID studies impacts representation. And then, and so we were finding that certain criteria biases may be against women, and we can see there's certain areas of the country that are driving it. So to me, I think having these sort of large scale repositories where we can not just study people's health, but we can even study healthcare itself and what are sort of the equity differences that maybe aren't just across the board, but where are the places that are the, kind of really driving our equity and things like that. So I think that's kind of part of the big future of health informatics, is being able to have access to those systems and to be able to do new kinds of research.
So let me ask you, Charisse, how much do you see your job as, or what you do as, descriptive versus normative? Meaning, like, you could say that, like, I'm doing this type of research to discover certain types of biases, and then I'm done. Like, my job is just to reveal information. Or do you ever cross into say, no, once we like the purpose of me revealing this information is such that like we can advocate for certain types of change and mitigate or ameliorate the consequences of these biases? Like, where do you see yourself in terms of the academic side versus and complementary to the advocacy side?
That's very interesting. Actually, my first job in health informatics was in a patient advocacy group. So we have in Iowa, Dr. Ponsetti, who came up with a non-surgical method for treating clubfoot, and he had so much evidence, but the surgical community wasn't really responding to it. And it actually ended up being these mothers who started a Yahoo group and were getting people to go to just Ponsetti trained doctors. So for me, the advocacy angle has always been important since I've started started this journey. And actually at N3C, we work with patient advocates. And we're working pretty closely with the government through the Recover Long COVID project. So to me, it's interesting because I think there can be it can be challenging to figure out how to advocate in science. It's like, do you want to do it in your research articles? Sometimes I'm like, I kind of want that stuff to be just kind of like just the facts so that it's more palatable for more people. And then sometimes thinking about advocacy secondary. I like to weave some of that into even my articles, because that's what intro and discussion sections, those are great places for a formal liberal arts major to speculate about how things should be. But, to me, even looking at some of that stuff, I started out because, in the literature, people were making assumptions. Oh, if you do this selection criteria, it's going to have this outcome. And I thought, okay, we need better ways of measuring this, because once we can measure it, then we can track it and try to mitigate problems. And so for me, I want to do more than just kind of have, research papers out there. I really want to be involved in kind of efforts to make a difference. And I think right now, even, at NIH, there's a lot of focus on getting away from just, okay, let's do another health disparity study to let's do work where we can have an impact.
I have more questions, but Phyllis in the chat asked a question. So let me just read her question because it speaks to something that you just said, and then we can take it from there. So it says, Dr. Madlock-Brown mentions that hospital systems are building data warehouses of patient data. What is the process for preventing the kind of abuse that the Lax family experienced? Or are we believing that the data is no longer the patient's? Are patients opting in, and does that create a level of bias?
Okay, those are all really great questions. I'm not sure if everybody knows about the Henrietta Lacks case, but her cells were used in a lot of genetics research without her consent, and used pervasively in training and education too as well. And so her family has tried to fight for some sort of recognition, compensation, whatever. And there's been, of course, a lot of history in our country, particularly for minorities, of people not being consented into research. So when the data is de-identified, the patients are not actually opting in. So you were able to build these EHR data warehouses with de-identified patient data. It's considered HIPAA compliant because it's not data that's specifically generated for a research study. It's just medical data. I have not yet seen kind of a lot of discussion from the patient's perspective about doing that, because it's in the aggregate. So it's kind of treated a little differently than just if you're trying to use a patient's direct data. So I think that's something where the ethics of that can very well be debated, especially since certain communities, they could be, it's kind of like what's going on with AI, everybody's using their data in these systems, not thinking about how all the ways the data could be used. So I know that with N3C, when it comes to, for instance, Native American data, in our systems, even though it was kind of a HIPAA compliant protected system and we had the rights to it, those groups also have the rights to their own data and to their own research. So we had to work with a lot of the tribal institutes on how we are allowed to use that data. And then, of course, when you go through there's some minor protections through IRB that, like, they look at it carefully when it could be about a protected group. But I think in the future, what we're going to see is more groups wanting to advocate for themselves and have a little more say in how data about their group is used. Because when we started working with this Native American group, I was like, oh, I wish we could do that too. We as Black people could have a little more say in, like, how is your data being used? Because to me, I do think that people do have a right to say, like, okay, you're doing all this research with our data. How do you know it's really in our best interest? And I think that's what programs like Aim Ahead. I don't know if everybody knows about the Aim Ahead program, where they're trying to do health disparities research, but have a lot of community engagement and have a lot of engagement with historically Black colleges and universities, so that you have representatives of the group you're studying, both having patient advocates, community advocates, and also researchers. So to me, I think that's the closest to the right way of doing it that we have going on, but I think it is a concern.
Since you already opened the door to talk about concerns, both in data, and I'm going to incorporate the adoption of AI in healthcare. And I don't want to fearmonger, but what are some of your biggest concerns going forward that we should be in the lookout for as a ethical leadership program?
Okay, this is I think this is a great question. I think as far as healthcare goes, one of my biggest concerns, as people are starting to use more and more social determinants of health data and trying to build patient profiles around patients, I think how well that goes is really going to be determined by the processes that are set in place. So there was recently an article that came out that physicians, somebody was doing a study of physicians in an environment where they were collecting SDOH data, but they were also demonstrating that they had kind of negative views about that patient population, right? Because there's a lot of, there's a lot of classism. That's kind of a big issue in our culture, and sort of racism and sexism, and that, these patients who were kind of having more social determinants of health issues also were more likely to have very negative statements about them in their electronic health record, because there's not always an awareness of what brings people to their current conditions. So to me, I think one of the things that can be concerning is when we're linking all these data sets, and that's kind of one of the directions that EHR warehouses are going, collecting more personal information, being able to connect a patient's data with different systems and building out profiles. I think there's a lot of potential. If a healthcare organization doesn't really have the patient's perspective in mind, there's a lot of issues. Like, one example is that a lot of hospitals, if they have algorithms to see which patients are likely to miss a meeting or miss an appointment, and so they'll have it double booked. Well, a lot of those patients who miss an appointment, they may be people who work jobs where you have to punch out, and they can't, they couldn't punch out of the day, or they have transportation issues. And so then they go into the hospital, they're double booked. That's going to be a quality of care issue. And so things, start to cycle. So I think, like any other tool, all technology, they're just tools. They can be used for good. They can be used for not so good. And we have to have really a good awareness of what it means to work from the patient perspective. And I think the only way to do that well is to have engagement with the full community and patient engagement. And I think that's going to become more important as we move forward. And we have these machines doing all kinds of things. And then we don't, because that's the problem with AI. It's a black box. Why does ChatGPT give me this answer? It can't be traced. So, so I think we have to, and also just like really like long-term monitoring. So I would say with health disparities and different things like that, we just haven't had a culture of monitoring. What is the problem? Is there a difference in outcome for this group or that group? It isn't something we typically just are monitoring all the time. So I think it's going to take a lot of management and oversight. I think that's what's going to really benefit. But I also think it has the potential to be extremely beneficial. And, even thinking about communication with the patient, I was reading a recent article on ChatGPT that when they took undergrad students, the ones that couldn't write well and they could use ChatGPT to help them, they had big improvements. But the students who were already doing well, it wasn't actually helping them. So I think sometimes there's this narrative you see out there that, okay, it's always going to help people who are already ahead, but that's not quite true. So I think there's a lot of potential to help patients understand their own care, figure out how to communicate to them in a way that they could understand, because, you can tell some of these systems to, you can train the systems to kind of communicate in a certain style. And so things like that, I think, could be helpful, but it's going to take a lot of, I think the main thing is we just have to be aware, that there are these limitations, and we have to work with patients. I think we have to work with sociologists. We need to bring in epidemiologists, because at the end of the day, AI is engineering. It's not science. And I think that that's something people don't really, even people in informatics, when I say that, people will be like, oh, I never thought of, people don't really think about it that way. But machine learning, any biostatistician will tell you it is the same as really, fully just using the scientific method. So I think that's actually something we have to think about as we develop these tools as well.
Have you seen health systems or health organizations that have been doing it well that we can look to as a model, or do you think that we're all of us are in need of certain help in changing, and there really isn't a model of go see that group or go see that health system who they're on the right track?
Specifically for AI, you mean?
Specifically for AI, yeah.
Okay, well, I don't know for full-on AI. I know that Boston Medical, they're rolling out this really cool social determinant. They've done a lot of work with social determinants of health and health equity, and they're building out these really, really cool dashboarding systems to really do some of the monitoring and tracking. And I think in terms of incorporating social determinants of health the right way, I think OCHIN is, that's another safety net hospital. I really think it's a lot of these hospitals that are specifically focused on being safety net hospitals that are really putting in the effort to figure out how to do things the best way. But I think honestly, nobody really fully has a handle on AI in healthcare.
What are some of the non-obvious things that you think will impact the future of healthcare? I mean, when we speak about AI, we speak about health informatics, we always talk about bias, social determinants of health, thinking about patients not simply as a group, but individual choices of patient autonomy as well. We think about the responsibility and accountability of physicians versus algorithmic diagnostics. But what are some of the things as an expert that you're aware of that we wouldn't be, in terms of what we should be considering?
I think what we're going to increasingly find with AI, like just having these larger systems, having more detailed data about patients, is we're going to really realize that a lot of what we do and a lot of the trends we see, they're not necessarily going to be fully representative. And I think that's going to be the big challenge, is understanding that even, within these different groups, there's so much diversity there. And a lot of times when we hear things like, okay, this group is more likely to have diabetes than the other, we start to look at it like, oh, this group all has diabetes. You know what I mean? Like, it's a little more prevalent, and we forget that, okay, but if this group has, and obviously diabetes is more prevalent than this, but just as an example, like if I read it, I can do a study that says this happens 10 times more likely in group B, but group A has it for 1%, group B has it for 10%. So it still means most of group B doesn't have it. And I think there's kind of things like that where we're really going to have to realize that we use sort of things like race, ethnicity, and gender. These are very broad tools. And when we do health equity research, I think when we over rely on those as like explanatory factors or how to interact with people, even think like when you look at things like cultural competency, it's like that's even like hard because there's even within in a group that's, you know, sort of Black in America, for instance, you have different norms in different parts of the world. And you're starting to also see people coming from other cultures who may have different healthcare needs or have different healthcare practices or something like that. So I think that, you know, there's this project called Recode where they're trying to get at more granular race and ethnicity data so that you can even start to study within populations. And then I think because there are so many different healthcare access issues, we can't expect that the problem that, for instance, what healthcare is like for minorities in Memphis is going to translate to a place like Iowa. One thing I'm kind of interested in right now is that, you know, a lot of the research just on race, it's focused on places like Chicago and Memphis where there's huge populations. But just as somebody who's grown up in Iowa, I can tell you like that what I would advocate for here, it could be different than in Memphis, because here we're in an environment where we're not going to have a lot of healthcare personnel who really even have any awareness of or who have not necessarily interacted with a lot of minorities. So that's very different than being in a place like Memphis. So I think trying to move away from looking at these different populations in a monolithical sense and recognizing that a lot of those tools will fail when we're kind of overly thinking of, okay, I've got the solution for this group. I think AI has the potential to really more personalize some of the way we think about patients and what we're able to do for them. And so I think that's going to be a big barrier to doing this well, is going to be just to assume that's, you know, these groups are going to be, you know, what it takes to help a group in this area is going to be what it takes to help a group in another area. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
It did. I mean, it's funny. What you ended up doing was you answered my question perfectly, but it took our assumption of, yeah, we know about bias to then say, actually, you don't know about bias entirely, because the way you're biasing patient populations in terms of like homogenizing them versus seeing the variability within the population was something that I didn't mention. So you actually answered it wonderfully. We have a couple of questions in the chat, so let me just go to the chat for a sec. We'll do Nick and then Malia. So are you aware of any data or analytics that are tracking and correlating social determinants of health and quality adjusted life year information, or a recommended author or evidence-based publication on the same? So basically asking you to use your library science experience.
Yeah. Actually, I was at AMEA. There was a presentation actually about that, but I do forget the name of the authors. But I could, if you email me, I can follow up with you. But yeah, that's another really important area. And I'm part of the reason I wanted to be at Iowa is the nursing college, they have good strengths in gerontology, and so that connection with you know, early aging is you know, that's a big deal. It's there's a huge connection there. So that's a really great question.
Well, just because you brought it up, I'm going to ask before we get to Malia's question. So we now know that you recently moved to University of Iowa, but you also did a PhD at University of Iowa. So what's it like going back to your academic home?
Yeah, it's really it's been really exciting, especially when, you know, when I was interviewing some of the people that used to be my professors were like, you know, kind of getting to interact with them as colleagues. It was just such a weird experience, to be honest. But it's exciting. It's exciting to feel that an organization that's given so much to you, you now have an opportunity to give back. And especially it being, you know, the university, this is the hospital I was born in and where my family was born in. And I have a lot of connections with it. So I think getting to go to your kind of home community and think, okay, I'm going to have an impact here. I'm going to do something meaningful for the community that like kind of, you know, I grew up in. It's a wonderful experience. And being at the College of Nursing, you know, Iowa has a really good nursing program, and I like nursing research because they really think about that patient perspective. That's a lot of what, you know, one of the, you know, nurses that I'm working with on multimorbidity, she's like, you know, from the physician perspective, you want to look at it as disease. She's like, but the patients, like they look at it in terms of symptoms. So it's a completely different orientation to the multimorbidity work even that I'm doing. So it's exciting. And then there's a lot of opportunity here. So I'm just so grateful to get to come home.
Did you always know or want to come back home, or was it just an opportunity that arose and you're like, I'm going to shoot for it?
Oh no, I wanted to come back. I made sure all the faculty knew if anything comes up, please think of me first.
I'm sure University of Tennessee wants to hear that, but of course.
Yeah, I mean, well, I like being in a little university college town. There's just something nice about it. And then when I was at UT, I was at just a health science center, and there's great things about it, but I like being it's, you know, it's the liberal arts students in me. I want to be part of a university that's doing everything. So that was an exciting part. But Iowa City, Iowa, yes, the state is mostly corn, but it's a great little city. You guys should come and visit.
Well, no, thank you for the invitation. I mean, I'm not going to book my flight now, but I am going to think about coming. Let me ask Malia's question because I don't want to forget it. Do you think people on the tech development side of AI and machine learning, health software, are concerned about ethical issues as they are building tech to be used in healthcare, or are the ethical issues being raised from the outside and addressed after programs are developed?
Oh, that's a
That's
wonderful
a
question.
that's a good question, and it's
that's a really
tough one.
great question. I'm just thinking about, like, when I started out, everything was like, oh, let's let the data talk for itself. We let the data speak for itself. And sometimes it was hard when you're like, well, I want to spend some time thinking about what the data actually means and represents. So I would say the tech community is trying to respond to it, but I don't think I think, you know, there are some people who've raised concerns about tech. But like Eli Pariser, who was one of the first people to write about like the Google search results. He actually went to my school, but he wrote to the same liberal arts school, but he's in the tech world. And so I think some of the early people who've kind of been whistleblowers, but I think there hasn't been momentum I don't think the momentum has come out of the tech world. I guess I can say it that way. And then I think, of course, with tech people, you want tech solutions, right? Like people want to say, oh, well, we'll solve this with transfer learning. It's like, okay, but you're transferring learning from a data set that also has biases in how, you know, and how patients enter the system to another. So just because this system has more of certain kinds of patients, you know, it's not enough. So I think that there is concern within the tech world, but I think a lot of the concerns, I would say, are in the momentum for really addressing the concerns I see as coming outside of the tech world.
If the concerns are coming from outside the tech world, how can either the outside be more persuasive to make the tech world see it as important, or how can those within the tech world who see ethics being an important aspect of the decision making as opposed to the reacting, have a stronger voice to advocate for ethics?
I think there's going to have to be a lot of pressure. I mean, I don't know if you guys are aware of the situation. I forget what her name was, but she was hired at Google to be an ethicist. And she was talking, this was like maybe 2 years ago. She was talking about, you know, she put a paper out just about large language models and their potential for bias, and that unleashing them before really understanding that bias and addressing it as a problem. You know, and she was let go, and it was fairly controversial. And I think that, you know, the real problem is, you know, things like OpenAI, they were supposed to be a nonprofit, but when you build a tool and there's billions of dollars that you're going to make from the tool,
Yeah.
You know, I don't believe people are just going to stop and be like, oh, wait, but let's think about the ethics first. I think it's going to have to there's going to have to be some sort of pressure point. because this is the technology, this is like, we're kind of in the next sort of industrial revolution type technology. Somebody's going to profit from it. And that, in America, that is our reality, because we haven't been good at getting regulations passed in the government. Like in Europe, they have a lot more guardrails to what these systems can do. We have not historically had that. I think in healthcare, it's really going to come to specifically the pressure from outside. I mean, the tech companies, they may be willing to do some of this, but without, I think, some sort of serious pressure, I think that's going to be a problem. I think a lot of government pressure is going to have to be somewhat part of it. This needs to be part of the quality metrics for hospitals and organizations. And I think it's going to require a lot of people just continuing to raise the alarm. And I think one of the things that some of our large scale repositories like N3C and places like this, we're going to continue to have to analyze this data and push for improvements, because I don't foresee, I think the amount of work it's going to take to actually figure some of this out, there's going to have to be some sort of pressure points for these tech companies.
Yeah, I mean, not to plug the AELP, but one of the things that we really think about in our methodology of looking at ethical awareness, analysis, and action is the relationship between motivation and incentivization, right? Like if we're motivated to act ethically, but we're incentivized otherwise, it's very hard to speak to our motivation. Not that we don't want to, and we always chase after incentives, but just from the sake of creating that distinction, it's always easier to try to find ways and solutions that align incentives and motivation, so people who want to do good are facilitated and able to do good. We only have 2 minutes, so I don't want to go over time, but I do want to ask you one last question based on something that you said in the beginning. What about being a nun was exciting for you, such that you wanted to become a nun?
Well, when I was young, we went to Catholic church, and I went to a Catholic school. I don't know. I think it was like there was something very mysterious about the nuns, but I've also just had this strong belief of being in service of some kind. And so as a child, I thought, these women, they dedicate their whole lives to helping other people. And I always just thought that was just a very, I guess, meaningful. I was kind of a serious kid.
Really? I would never have imagined. I will say, Charisse, that's a perfect way to end. I think that what you're doing, even if you're not a nun, you are in service. And I am so excited for you to come in September. I'm looking forward to your keynote. I'm looking forward to spending time with you and working on some of the cases that we'll be doing, both in AI and in some of the other areas that we'll be discussing at the program. So thank you so much for sharing your life and your experience and your time with us today. And I feel like it's a privilege to get to know you this hour. So thank you.
Thank you. This has been great.
Thanks. All right. See you.